Diffusion, the international science radio show.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
So my name's Kelsey Picard. I'm a plant scientist and a geneticist. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Tasmania. Also a science communicator involved with a bunch of other side projects, so I'm kept busy with a lot of science activities.
And you've got your own podcast.
I do, yeah. I'm a co-host of a podcast, a science podcast called That's What I Call Science. We're a team of women in STEM, so all different branches of science, technology, engineering and math. And we like to interview other scientists about cool different science projects that are happening in Tasmania and around Australia.
Wonderful. Are you a botanist or a horticulturalist?
Well, I probably identify more as a botanist. I'm very interested in horticulture, but I don't have a background in the application to agriculture. So my training was more pure botany, so identifying plants, but actually more genetics and biochemistry, so what's happening inside of the plants.
And how did you come to choose botany?
It was actually just luck, to be honest. When I finished high school, I really didn't think I wanted to go to university. It really intimidated me. I was the first in my family to go to university. So I didn't have any role models that I could sort of ask about the experience. But when I left high school, I was working at a chocolate factory, which sounds like the dream job, and it was for a while, but I really missed learning. I got really bored of the same thing every day. So I went to university halfway through my first year, and that meant that I had limited selection of what subjects I could take because I was starting halfway through. And one of the subjects I could take was botany. Now, I took it because I didn't have very many options, and I really didn't think I would enjoy that subject. I thought it was going to be boring. I only wanted to study animals and humans, but it completely changed my whole path of science. It was the best subject I'd ever taken. It opened my eyes to the whole amazing world of plants and how complicated and interesting they are. So yeah, that's how I ended up studying botany.
And what's your favorite part of it, do you think? What is it? You were talking about the complexity and the fascination. What is it that draws you into the plant world?
Well, I don't even know where to start. I guess there are so many things I find so fascinating about plants. I guess the fact that they've evolved to live off of just sunlight and water, like that's incredible. We wouldn't be on Earth if it wasn't for plants. We wouldn't be able to breathe the oxygen that we need. You know, they have to withstand whatever environments they are existing in. So they can't just get up and walk away if the climate is changing, or, you know, they don't have a food source there, or they're shaded by another plant. So the fact that they can adapt so well and quickly to their environment, I find really fascinating. The way they reproduce is something I'm particularly interested in. So I study flowering. I'm very interested in how we get all of our food from plants as well. So yeah, I mean, I could go on forever about why I love plants.
And where does your research focus at the moment?
My research focuses on flowering timing of legumes. So I'm looking at what controls flowering in legumes, and particularly what makes a plant stop flowering. So what's the process going on in the plants there?
Do you get some that flower all year long, or do they have a favourite season?
So plants usually flower at a certain time of year. That time can vary between plants depending on what sort of pollinator species they might be after to come and visit their flowers, or what environmental conditions they're measuring to determine when to flower. So plants are constantly measuring the environment around them. They're measuring temperature, rainfall, daylight is a big indicator. And so they're constantly reading the environment around them to decide when the optimum time to flower is.
Because I've seen I have an interest in fruit trees and carnivorous plants and things myself as well. And sometimes when you're looking at them online, the sales, they talk about ever-bearing ones as opposed to ones that only flower in spring or summer or winter?
Everbearing. Yeah, perhaps they have been bred in a way that they don't have as strong flowering signal requirements, so that they don't need, for example, a frost before spring to trigger flowering. That might have been bred out of them. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we're researching. What do the plants need in order to decide to flower, and what genes are controlling that process? So once we have a better understanding about that, for example, with legumes that we're studying, we can then target those genes for breeding programs and try and get plants that are going to produce food for longer periods or even all year round, potentially.
I mean, that's one of the things. A lot of our crops are just annuals, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of them are annuals. Yeah, there's a few reasons we would use an annual over a perennial in crop plants. So perennial is when you'll get repetitive growth year after year. An annual will usually only live 1 year, maybe two, and have one reproductive phase. Most of our crop plants are annuals because we like to harvest them all in one go. If you think of big commercial crop farming, so wheat or many grains, we run huge combine harvesters basically over these crops once they're finished, and so we can collect all the seed in a big batch. If we're talking about perennials or plants that live for longer periods, like apple trees, that requires more hands-on harvesting, which isn't probably as suited to our mass production that us humans need nowadays. Yeah.
So the perennials are really only good for people growing food for themselves.
Yeah, but there's a lot of interest in using perennials in crop production as well, because they require a lot less input and maintenance. If you're able to grow a plant for many years and still get production from them, you're going to get less disturbance in the soil. It's better for the general ecology in the field. So people are still interested in turning or converting annual type crops to perennial type crops. Yeah, there's variation within different plant families, so that's definitely a research topic as well. But yeah, at home, I guess it's convenient when you're growing in your veggie garden to not have to keep sowing things year to year. I know that, for example, strawberries, you can leave them in the ground and they'll come back the next year, and that's quite convenient. Yeah.
So for listeners they've obviously, everyone's seen flowers, but not everyone knows how they work. We know bees come and pollinate them, but what are the pollinators doing?
Yeah, so plants produce flowers as a way of reproducing. Basically, a plant will decide to flower when it is basically decided that it's the end of its life, or for an annual especially. It's spent a bunch of time photosynthesizing, gaining energy from the sun, and it's ready to put all of those energy reserves into a flower and produce seeds. So a plant will make a flower, and the flowers are basically the reproductive organs of the plant. So there'll be male and female parts within the flowers. Sometimes the male and female parts are on separate flowers, or even on completely separate plants, depends on the species. But those little pollinators, so things like bees, birds, bats, lizards, will come and visit flowers that are attracting those specific pollinators to spread pollen around. So basically pick up pollen by visiting a flower. Usually it's attracted by something like a nectar source, and it has to be a reward for the pollinator. Otherwise, there's no real reason it would come to visit. So if there's nectar in the flower, they'll come to eat the nectar, and they're basically accidentally picking up the pollen as they go, and then they'll move to another flower to eat the nectar again and spread the pollen.
And does your love of plants go outside the lab?
Yeah, absolutely. I have numerous houseplants, more than I should count. I really enjoy growing my own food at home, so I have a couple of veggie gardens and flowers. I like to grow flowers. Whenever I'm out on a bushwalk, I'm constantly stopping and looking at the plants around me. I'm completely plant obsessed, to be honest.
And you're quite into science communication. So you've been involved with Science Week and Young Tassie Scientists. And what's your podcast?
The podcast is called That's What I Call Science.
And how do people find it to listen?
So you could search That's What I Call Science or That's Science Tas. Basically, wherever you listen to podcasts currently, we're basically on any podcasting streaming platform. We also have a website called thatscience.org. We're on all social media under That's Science Tas. So yeah, every week we release an episode, not too dissimilar from yours, Ian. I've been listening today, really enjoy your podcast.
Thank you.
Lots of great topic ideas I've sort of written down since listening to your podcast. But we're trying to elevate the voices of women in STEM and also other diverse minorities in STEM, because the public really has a perception of what a scientist should look like, and that's not usually the case. So there is definitely a gender disparity in science, and there are many reasons behind that, but we want to make sure that young people are seeing role models that look like them, that they can identify with, who are successful role models, and try and elevate their voices through this podcast.
And how did you come to join the podcast?
Well, I guess it started from previous science communication activities I was doing. So you mentioned Young Tassie Scientist. You've had a couple of other Young Tassie Scientists on your show before. So I started that way, visiting schools, communicating to children, which is super rewarding. But I also recognised a lack of communication to adults. And so some friends and I, the host, Neve Chapman, she started a podcast, and I joined along as a natural scientist host. And so it started from there. Basically, we wanted to be able to communicate science topics and issues to adults as well, and also get, younger people interested as well. So I guess there's quite a large science communication cohort in Tassie, which is really special. And so all kinds of things are branching out from that work.
Wonderful. And so for the Young Tassie Scientists, were you visiting schools before you started doing the videos?
Yeah, that's right. We used to go into schools. We would do road trips all around Tasmania in August during Science Week and visit regional schools, local schools in Hobart, and tell them all about the science we're doing. Just try and get them engaged, be able to see that, you know, science is a viable career for them. That was super rewarding, and also a really great way to see Tasmania. I'm not from Tasmania, from New Zealand, but yeah, getting to travel around and visiting all the schools was a really great opportunity for me as a communicator.
And do you have any suggestions for people wanting to get into the science of botany?
Well, I mean, if you're already sort of inquisitive about the world around you and interested in how things work, it's a pretty easy path to stay in science, I would say, because you're just going to be genuinely interested in what you're learning every day. I mean, at high school, I never knew that I would end up doing a PhD in plant science. I didn't really enjoy school very much. Science was my best subject, mostly because I was just the most interested in it. So I was willing to sort of engage with the content, and then by accident, I guess I did better in those subjects. But I guess something that I would like younger people to realize is that even though you maybe don't know what you want to do when you're young, you'll figure it out along the way. And I think there's a lot of pressure on young people to sort of know very early on what they want to do, and then it feels very scary to then be making those decisions about which subjects to choose and whether to go to university or not. But if you're genuinely an inquisitive person and interested in the natural world around you, you'll be drawn to science, and it should all really work out that way.
And I guess people who have gardens at home can sort of make more scientific observations, maybe even experiments with the plants in the garden.
Yeah, people can do science every day, basically. You don't have to be a scientist to be a scientist. You know, if you're growing food at home, you're doing your own science experiments. You might realize the potatoes don't grow in one spot as well as they did last year in a different spot. So you learn from that, and then you change the method next year, you know. Or you notice a pest has arrived and it's on your plant, so you have to figure out how do you get rid of that pest and what are the consequences of getting rid of it. And gardening is just full of science. And I think people don't really consider that. They probably think that scientists are smart, and it's almost like this elitist view of scientists, but it's really just people are constantly doing science in their everyday life. It's not something that you have to go to university to do.
Would you have any final words for the audience?
Well, I guess if you're interested in hearing about other cool science that's happening in Tassie, you can check out Young Tassie Scientists. That's what I call Science Podcast. I'm also involved in a Science of Beer blog. So a friend and I are interested in, well, are big fans of beer. We're also really interested in how beer is made. So we've got another science communication branch, which is called Science Made Bearable, Beera-able. Check them out.
Awesome. Well, Kelsey, thank you very much.